Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Polly Klaas. Polly Klaas was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California. She lived with her parents, Mark and Eva, and her younger sister Annie. When Polly was very young, her parents divorced. Afterwards, Polly, her younger sister, and their mother moved to Petaluma, California. Mark has started a new relationship after he and Eva divorced, and Polly gets along well with her father's new partner. After her parents got divorced, Polly made a conscious effort to maintain a good relationship with both her mother and father, helping to keep the peace within the family. As a child, Polly was described as quiet and innocent. Although she had few friends and was generally shy, she excelled in theater. Polly actively participated in school plays, community musicals, and often secured lead roles. Her passion for theater fueled her dream of becoming a talented actress in the musical theater field. Besides, Polly also enjoys having sleepovers at friends' houses or inviting them to her house. These sleepovers are usually with her close group of friends. On October 1, 1993, Polly invited two friends, Jillian and Kate, to her home for a sleepover. Her mother, Eva, agreed to let the girls spend the night. That evening, the three girls had dinner and spent the first few hours together without incident. When Eva started feeling unwell with a bad headache, she decided to go to bed, around 9:45 p.m., and asked the girls to wake her if they needed anything. Eva later said she took 2 sleeping pills and fell asleep after 11 p.m. She was suddenly awakened by Jillian and Kate screaming. The girls frantically told Eva that Polly had been taken by a man who broke into the house. Eva immediately called the police and then checked on her other daughter, Annie. She was in the room, and she didn't seem to know what was going on. When the police arrived, they questioned Jillian and Kate. According to the girls, they had been in Polly's room playing, trying on different costumes for Halloween. It was around 11 p.m. when Polly suggested it was bedtime, and her friends concurred. And when Polly went to get the inflatable bed from her mother, she met a man standing at the door. The man held a knife and was not wearing a mask. But since we're approaching Halloween, the girls initially thought it was a joke and started laughing. However, they quickly realized the situation was not a joke at all. A man forcefully entered a house and became enraged when the 3 girls inside began to laugh. In a fit of anger, he restrained Jillian and Kate by tying their hands and feet and then demanded to know who lived in the house. Each girl replied that it was Polly. The man then proceeded to cover Jillian and Kate's heads with pillowcases and instructed them to count to 1,000. He told them that he would temporarily take Polly away, but promised to return her shortly. However, once Jillian and Kate realized the man had left the house, they tried to free themselves, which took approximately half an hour. They left the room and immediately informed Eva that Polly was missing and that a man had taken her. They reported the incident to the police, providing a brief description of the man. This allowed the officers to create a sketch of the suspect to aid in the search. Unfortunately, there was limited evidence found at the scene. A few footprints were discovered, but they all belonged to Polly, Eva, Annie, or friends who had visited the house in the days leading up to the incident. Some fabric fibers found on the carpet in Polly's room were significantly different from those in the carpet at her home. Analysis revealed that they belonged to a car's carpet. Police searched cars belonging to people the family knew but found no match, leading them to believe the fibers came from the kidnapper's car. A palm print was also found, but it couldn't be matched to anyone in the databases at the time because fingerprinting and DNA technology weren't advanced enough. However, the print was saved for possible comparison to a suspect in the future. In addition to the fibers, a piece of fabric resembling silk was found in Polly's room. It appeared to have been cut from a garment with scissors and had a unique pattern. The police believed this could be a valuable piece of evidence in the future. A hair was also found, but its origin was unknown. The DNA technology weren't developed at the time prevented analysis, making it impossible to determine who the hair belonged to. The search for Polly was one of the largest in United States history at that time, with many volunteers joining in. Around 4,000 people, including police and volunteers, searched her neighborhood, vacant lots, and nearby estates for Polly. The police attempted to find the driver who resembled the sketch, but were unsuccessful. Time was of the essence, as police hoped to find Polly within 24 hours of her disappearance, after which it would be highly unlikely to find her alive. The investigation was handed over to the FBI, who also actively worked to find Polly as soon as possible. However, as each day passes, the chances of finding her alive diminish. The police asked people who lived nearby if they saw or heard anything unusual on the night Polly was abducted. Several neighbors reported seeing a suspicious man wandering around the neighborhood. Although he looked unusual, at the time, he did not cause any concern, so they did not contact the emergency services. It wasn't until police showed the neighbors the sketch of suspect, they realized it was the same person. To gather more information about Polly's disappearance, police interviewed every teacher and staff member at the school she attended. They focused on whether anyone knew the suspect or had any details about Polly's situation. However, none of them had any knowledge about the incident, and everyone had an alibi for the time of the incident. Additionally, none of the school staff matched the suspect's description. In their investigation, the police went as far as comparing fibers found at Polly's home with the car mats of the school staff's vehicles. But all of them do not coincide. With each passing day, the sense of desperation among the family, the authorities, and the public grew. They feared that the kidnapper posed a threat to society. This added to the urgency for the police to solve the case. A $200,000 reward was offered for any information that could help locate Polly. The reward was sponsored by actress Winona Ryder, who also held a press conference calling on the public to pray for Polly's safe return. Also, Polly's case happened in 1993, a time when the internet was still in its early stages of development. Law enforcement agencies, including the police and the FBI, were not yet familiar with using the internet to disseminate information or search for missing persons. 3 people from California took matters into their own hands and posted information about Polly on the internet. This included a picture of Polly, a sketch of her suspected kidnapper, and a reward advertisement for any useful clues. At the time, there was no social media. But the information still managed to spread and reach approximately 25 million people in the US. FBI investigators believe that social media can play a significant role in their investigation into Polly's disappearance. Although a large number of people are following the case online, but no clues from internet users could help solve the case. Nevertheless, the campaign has attracted a large number of volunteers and several call centers have been set up to handle the volume of calls received each day. As a result, families of other missing children reached out to the Polly family for support, hoping to find their own children too. It had been weeks since Polly's abduction, and investigators were growing increasingly frustrated. They had no new leads and had yet to identify the kidnapper, making DNA comparisons impossible. Just when things seemed bleak, Polly's father, Mark, received a phone call from a girl claiming to be Polly. She explained that she was at a hotel and that her kidnapper had temporarily left her alone, allowing her to make the call. The girl then hung up, and Mark immediately informed the police. Unfortunately, the FBI did not have tools to trace the call at the time, so they had to wait for another call, in the hoping it would give them the opportunity to trace the kidnapper's location. A few hours later, the second call came. It was the same girl who had spoken to Mark earlier. The police were able to trace this call but were surprised to find that it did not lead to a hotel, as the girl had claimed, but rather to a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived at the house from which the call was made, they discovered it was a prank call made by a teenage girl around the same age as Polly. The girl's voice was similar to Polly's, which was the reason behind the confusion. According to her, her friends had dared her to make the call. She wasn't arrested or taken to the police station, but her parents were asked to control her behavior and advise her against making such serious and false claims in the future. On November 28, 1993, about 2 months after Polly's disappearance, a woman contacted the police to report finding 3 suspicious items on her large plot of land. Upon further investigation by the police and FBI, they discovered 3 crucial pieces of evidence: a piece of silk identical to the one found in Polly's room, a pair of ballet ties that Eva reported missing on the night of Polly's disappearance, and duct tape. This led the police to speculate that Polly was likely in the area. The FBI uncovered more information that shed light on the case. On the day Polly went missing, the same woman had reported to the police that strangers had been frequently visiting her plot of land. The property didn't have a fence around it, despite signs indicating it was private. As a result, many strangers unknowingly trespassed on the land, with the owner often encountering intruders. However, one incident stood out, especially considering it occurred on the night Polly was abducted. On that evening, a man in a car drove onto the property, but his vehicle got stuck in the mud. The nanny, who looking after the homeowner's son, was the first to see the man but was too scared to approach him. The owner also chose not to approach the man due to a fierce look in his eyes, so they decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, they questioned the man, who claimed he was unaware he was on private property and promised to leave immediately. However, he asked for help pulling his car out of the mud. The police observed that the man was visibly nervous and sweating, appearing to be under the influence of a substance. But they were unable to administer a drug test and couldn't arrest him since he wasn't being violent. Finally, the policeman helped him get the car out of the mud, and the man drove away. The man's name was Richard Allen Davis, born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. Richard's childhood was marked by violence at the hands of his parents, particularly when he was 12 years old. This led to his parents' separation, and his mother completely disowned him, stating she wanted nothing to do with her son and leaving him in the care of his father. Richard's father was highly irresponsible, often leaving the house for extended periods of time, sometimes days, and leaving Richard alone. Richard sometimes stayed with neighbors or would seek out relatives. Richard started committing crimes when he was a teenager. He started stealing, got into fights, and spent several months in a reformatory school. At the age of 17, he committed a violent robbery that almost resulted in the death of the victim. The judge offered Richard 2 options: reform school or joining the U.S. Army. Richard chose to join the Army, but he was unable to maintain good behavior. As a result, he was dishonorably discharged after serving for less than 2 years. When Richard was approximately 20 years old, he was convicted of robbery, kidnapping, and received a 15-year sentence. However, due to good behavior, he was paroled after serving just 1 year. During that time, Richard was haunted by another charge. Many of Richard's friends believed he had killed a 19-year-old woman named Marlene, despite the police determining she had left willingly. Marlene's close friends suspected Richard was the culprit responsible for her death the night they attended a party together. Nonetheless, these allegations remained unsubstantiated rumors at the time. Richard was in financial trouble, and as such, he did not have a permanent home, leaving it unknown where he actually lived. The police issued an internal warning to officers, advising them to exercise extreme caution when interacting with him. Fearing Richard might flee California or even the United States, the authorities chose not to share any information with the media. Richard was ultimately arrested on November 13, 1993. He was driving under the influence and was stopped by a police officer. A breathalyzer test was administered, which Richard failed. Richard matching the suspect's description in the Polly Klaas kidnapping case. The police carefully approached Richard and arrested him for violating his probation due to he had violated his alcohol level while driving. However, the real reason for the arrest was the kidnapping. At the police station, Richard's true identity was revealed, and he was informed that he was under arrest in connection with the Polly Klaas kidnapping case. During the interrogation, Richard initially denied the charges but ultimately confessed to the crime. Further evidence, including a palm print matching the one found at the scene and fabric fibers from his car's carpet matching those found Polly's house, supported Richard's guilt. When questioned, Polly Klaas' friends identified Richard as the kidnapper. Moreover, an identical piece of fabric was found in Richard's car and on piece of land of the woman who had called the police, providing additional evidence against him. The suspect eventually admitted to the crime after much evidence pointed to his guilt. Richard claimed that on the day of the incident, he had been using legal substances with friends and was not feeling well. Despite this, he decided to commit a burglary and drove to a neighborhood where he spotted a house with an open window. He climbed in through the window, searching for valuables, and was about to leave when he encountered Polly. She was extremely frightened, and Richard made the decision to abduct her. He put Polly in the back seat of his car and drove to a secluded area, where he sexually assaulted her. After this, he got back in the driver's seat and continued driving. Eventually, Richard's car got stuck in the mud on private property, where a woman and her babysitter saw him with Polly in the back seat. The police arrived to help him, pulling the car out of the mud. Tragically, after they assisted him, Richard drove away and strangled Polly to death. He later revealed to the police the location of her body and them to begin a search. On December 4, 1993, approximately 2 months after Polly Klaas's disappearance, her body was discovered in a grave by the side of a highway, which was dug by Richard. A forensic examination was conducted and confirmed that the cause of Polly's death was strangulation, which was consistent with Richard's previous statements. The estimated date of death was roughly consistent with the day she went missing. With this evidence, Richard went on trial for kidnapping, murder, and rape. During the trial, Richard was given the opportunity to say a few words. In his statement, he apologized to Polly's family but also made the shocking accusation that her father had been sexually abusing her. According to Richard, Polly told him that her father's actions towards her were something Richard should not have done to her. This accusation angered Polly's father to the point that he became violent and was restrained by several people in the courtroom to prevent him from attacking Richard. Everyone was shocked by Richard's words, mainly because he showed no remorse for his statement, and many suspected that Polly's father had abused her. Despite no evidence to prove it, Richard was found guilty of Polly Klaas kidnapping and murder on June 18, 1996, subsequently received a death sentence in August. He attempted to appeal but was unsuccessful. In 2006, Richard was found unresponsive in his cell after overdosing on pills, but was revived and returned to prison. Richard's lawyer made an unsuccessful attempt to appeal the conviction to the Supreme Court in 2009. The Supreme Court upheld Richard's death sentence, with his attorney indicating plans to file further appeals. These ongoing appeals have led to a prolonged stay on death row. It is anticipated that once the appeals process concludes, the execution will proceed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Soni's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother discovered a bruise on Soni's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Soni cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Soni's also witnessed the injury, but Soni refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Soni and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Soni's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Soni and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Soni by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Soni and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Soni was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Soni asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Soni got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Soni calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Soni had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Soni tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Soni's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Soni was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Soni called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Soni, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Soni returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Soni and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Soni tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Soni did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Soni saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Soni also provided her home address. Soni's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Soni's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Soni's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Sony, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her 5th child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Sony and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Sony moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Sony and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Sony's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the 3rd floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Sony moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Sony and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Sony spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Sony said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Sony did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Sony, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Sony, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Sony and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2nd, around 7 p.m., while inside Sony's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Sony's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26th. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Sony had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Sony planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26th. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Sony's disappearance, he was released. Sony's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Sony was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Sony's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4th, the police went to Sony's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Sony's wallet. Sony's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24th under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27th. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4th, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18th, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24th. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1st. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1st at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, This occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1st, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of the Parente family. William Michael Parente was born on July 20, 1949, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. His parents, Willie and Rulon Parente, raised him with values rooted in their family's history of law enforcement. His father, a New York trooper, played a significant role in shaping his upbringing. As an only child, William received his parents' undivided attention. He spent summers enjoying the sun with his family in Long Beach. William pursued his education at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, thanks in part to the financial support of his uncle, Anthony J. Russo. William worked in his uncle's Manhattan law office on the Avenue of the Americas. There, he built a reputation as a thoughtful lawyer and dedication to his family. William was known for his demeanor, courteous which extended to everyone. He worked diligently for long hours, but made sure not to overwork himself. Unlike many of his peers, he refrained from using profanity or engaging in post-work gatherings for drinks. His disciplined lifestyle and commitment to kindness set him apart in the legal community. Even on difficult days, William maintained his composure and treated everyone with respect. In 1977, after being admitted to the New York bar, William married Betty Mazzarella. He began his career at a prestigious Wall Street law firm but made a significant change in 1988. When Betty became pregnant with their first child, William decided to start his own private practice. This change happened around the same time the family moved to Garden City, New York, an affluent community in Nassau County, Long Island. Despite living in the suburbs, the William family remained connected to their Brooklyn roots. They regularly returned to their old neighborhood to enjoy local delicacies, reconnect with old friends, visit their mother, and relive cherished childhood memories. By the time he was 60, William Parente had become an experienced estate and tax attorney. He ran his practice from an office in a Queens shopping center. His wife, Betty Mazzarella, 58, dedicated her time to taking care of their home and organizing charity fundraisers in their local community. Betty was actively involved in church activities, which were an integral part of their neighborhood's social fabric. The couple had 2 daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. Stephanie, the elder daughter, was 19 years old and a sophomore at Loyola College, studying speech pathology with plans to pursue dentistry in the future. Her friendly nature made her well liked by her classmates and teachers. She also maintained close relationships with her friends back home in Garden City. Their younger daughter, Catherine, showed remarkable talent at just 11 years old, earning her admiration from teachers and staff at Garden City Middle School. Her exceptional abilities indicated a promising future ahead. In the later stages of his legal career, William became involved in what he called bridge loans. He acted as a financial intermediary, similar to a bank, allegedly using assets from investment portfolios under his management to finance these loans. When an investor asked for their money back, William Parente was unable to return the funds or explain why he couldn't. On April 15, 2009, William, along with his wife Betty and youngest daughter Catherine, took a trip to visit their eldest daughter Stephanie in Towson, planning to surprise her. They booked room 1029 at the Sharon Hotel, near the Talone Town Center Mall, with a reservation until the 19th. When they arrived, Stephanie's friend was surprised, given that classes had just resumed after the Easter break and Stephanie was busy preparing for a chemistry exam. The visit was unexpected, especially since the parents had already planned to visit on Friday the 17th to discuss Stephanie's study abroad plans in England. Despite the initial surprise, the visit seemed like a normal family reunion. However, what took place that day remains unclear. Based on the evidence, here is what happened. Betty Mazzarella Parente was the first victim. She was brutally assaulted and suffocated in bed on Sunday morning. Later, Catherine, the youngest daughter, met a similar fate, dying from the same violence as her mother. Catherine's body was placed beside her mother's. On Sunday afternoon, Stephanie arrived at the hotel after leaving her campus and tragically met the same demise as her mother and younger sister. Her body was laid beside theirs on the bed. None of the victims showed signs of struggle. No evidence of drugging or physical restraint was found. William Parente carefully planned the annihilation of his family. On that somber Sunday, around midnight, one of Stephanie's close friends and roommates grew worried about her absence from their dorm room. After hours of worrying, the roommate called the hotel room phone to reach Stephanie. The roommate knew Stephanie planned to return to the dorm to study for final exams, so they were surprised when William Parente, Stephanie's father, answered the call. William explained that Stephanie was staying at the hotel with family. The roommate accepted this excuse and ended the call, unaware that Stephanie was already dead. Later, the roommate thought back on the conversation and remembered that William's tone seemed unusual. On Monday morning, William Parente ended his life by using a knife he had bought at a nearby mall. He inflicted fatal injuries on himself in the hotel bathroom. When the family failed to check out, hotel staff became concerned. School Loyola College also raised concerns about Stephanie's unexplained absence from classes, especially since it was a crucial time for her final exams. The college contacted the hotel, requesting a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. At 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter their 10th floor room but found the door locked and received no response. The housekeeper alerted other staff, and a hotel manager entered the room. The manager found William Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom, having taken his own life with a knife. The manager quickly called emergency services and continued to investigate. As he entered the room further, he found 3 bodies carefully arranged on one of the beds. The victims were Betty Mazzarella and her two daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. The Baltimore County Police were immediately called to the scene, and all other guests on the 10th floor were relocated as part of the investigation. The police also took the family's Mercedes-Benz SUV from the hotel parking lot. After investigating, they determined that William Parente had committed a murder-suicide on that Sunday. And the police found that the causes of death were asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. They believe that Betty and Catherine were the first victims, followed by Stephanie. The police think that one of William's last interactions was with Stephanie's boyfriend, who tried to call Stephanie around midnight. However, Stephanie had already been killed by her father by then. Shortly after the call, William likely went to the bathroom and took his own life using a knife he had bought earlier from the mall. It is believed that William Parente's decision to kill his family and then commit suicide may have stemmed from an investigation into his possible involvement in a major fraud. William Parente was accused of being part of a Ponzi scheme, a type of investment scam where money from new investors is used to pay existing ones, often resulting in huge financial losses. Investors have been scammed of around $20 million, with one investor claiming a loss of $450,000. Investigations showed that William had issued bounced checks totaling $245,000 to investors, leading to further complaints to the New York Attorney General's office. After William Parente's death, some investors came forward with losses totaling millions of dollars. A colleague of William's made a poignant observation: financial losses can be recovered, but the loss of human life is irreparable. Friends and family have struggled to overcome their feelings of grief following the horrific incident. A memorial service was held at Loyola College on Monday night to honor Stephanie's memory. The family William Parente home, once full of life, became a somber space filled with tributes such as flowers and candlelit vigils. A funeral service was held at St. Joseph's Church in Garden City to commemorate Betty and her daughters. According to reports, Catherine's middle school classmates were transported by bus to attend the service. Stephanie's college peers made a significant effort to join, driving from Talon and arriving as early as 4 a.m. for the morning ceremony. The family was laid to rest together at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale, New York. In contrast, William Parente received a separate, private funeral service at a different location. He was cremated, but the location of his ashes was not publicly disclosed. The horrific actions of this merciless perpetrator have caused immense distress for the victims and their loved ones. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster had always been considered a success. His mother, Enid, described him as someone who actively pursued financial opportunities from an early age. Along with his younger brother, Andrew, he aspired to follow in the footsteps of their late father, who had been a sales manager. Although they both aimed to become successful businessmen, Chris and Andrew had had a tense relationship since they were children. Andrew later explained that Chris's confidence and assertiveness had overshadowed Andrew's quiet nature. Despite this, both brothers were very close to their mother, Enid. In 1987, Chris married Jill, a housewife, and they had their daughter Kirsty in 1993. Chris's path to wealth began in the late 80s when he worked as a mattress salesman and used inexpensive pizza boxes for insulation. His life changed dramatically after he founded a successful engineering company. This business made Chris a self-made millionaire through the development of an innovative insulation material that became essential in the oil industry. The Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, had led to a catastrophic fire that lasted for days and claimed the lives of 167 people. After watching the news, Chris saw an opportunity in this tragedy and identified a market niche for fireproof insulation specifically for oil and gas rigs. Although many oil companies showed interest, they wanted certification of the product's effectiveness before signing a contract. To prove its value, Chris took the financial risk of mortgaging his house to fund an experiment. The test was successful. His product, Overshield, showed exceptional resilience compared to other insulation materials when exposed to fire. It even received a rare A1 fire test rating. Major oil companies quickly placed orders, making Christopher Foster a millionaire almost overnight. Reports suggested that he earned so much money that he didn't know how to spend it all. As his business grew, Christopher's annual turnover increased significantly from £50,000 to £1 million. By 2004, Chris's net worth had been reported to be £10 million. That same year, his wife Jill noticed a house in Shropshire Life magazine. It was Usbaston House, a beautiful mansion in Maesbrook, a wealthy village in Shropshire, England. The estate was 16 acres in size, had its own lake and equestrian grounds. Despite being offered at around £1.5 million, the house still needed repairs. Jill was so intrigued that Chris made an offer the next morning. Foster's family quickly sold their house and moved to Usbaston House. Chris then invested a further £50,000 to install a swimming pool and landscape the property. After settling down, Chris led a lavish lifestyle. He bought 2 Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a James Bond-style Aston Martin, Range Rovers, and many other vehicles. Their daughter Kirsty attended a private boarding school, and Chris also bought her several horses. Kirsty spent time with her horses when not at school and participated in equestrian competitions. Friends described her as quiet, thoughtful, and kind. In addition, Chris also bought 4 dogs and several pigeons. He further enhanced their lives by hiring a butler and a personal assistant, and the house had antique furniture worth more than £200,000. Chris's most expensive hobby was his passion for shooting, demonstrated by his expensive gun collection, each costing between £12,000 and £12,500, equivalent to nearly $20,000 at the time. Chris often attended shooting parties that could last 3 days, with bills running up to £8,000. He had a habit of leaving guns around the house. Occasionally, when pigeons made a mess of Chris's car, he would shoot them, much to Jill's frustration. In one disturbing incident, when Kirsty's black Labrador began disturbing the sheep, Chris was unable to control the dog and led it down a country road to shoot it in the head. Chris was a successful businessman but lacked a long-term vision. Notoriously impulsive, he craved instant gratification and was quick to cut ties with people who annoyed him. Chris enjoyed being admired and envied by others for his wealth, and social status was very important to him. Over time, both Chris and Jill moved up the social ladder, and it became clear to those close to Chris that he wanted to move away from his roots in Wolverhampton. Jill enjoyed shopping sprees and spent her days doing self-care activities like nail and hair appointments, along with beauty treatments like manicures and Botox injections. Chris and his family regularly went on luxury vacations, staying in luxury hotels and enjoying the best food. These lavish trips could sometimes cost up to £20,000 each, and Chris didn't hesitate to pay. However, unbeknownst to his friends and family, Chris had reached his financial limit and began withdrawing money from his business. His excessive spending had led to financial imbalance, with more money going out than coming in. In 2003, Chris had signed an exclusive contract with DRC, giving them the exclusive rights to produce his oil rig sealant. By 2004, his net worth had been reported to be £1 million. However, by 2005, he owed £2.8 million. Instead of cutting costs, Chris, due to his lavish spending habits, sought more money from other sources. Despite the exclusive agreement with DRC, he signed another contract with another company to sell his products. DRC discovered this infringement and sued Chris, resulting in a lawsuit and DRC acquiring Chris's patent. Chris went bankrupt, and in 2007, his company was dissolved. His assets worth £3 million were frozen and his salary was gone. Despite serious financial troubles, Chris continued to act as if nothing significant had happened. At the same time, Chris became involved in a dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had failed to pay VAT, national insurance, and various other taxes. To deal with his increasing tax obligations, he had to borrow from banks to ease his financial strain. In addition, he had mortgaged the Osbaston house 3 times and withdrawn money from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his lavish lifestyle and constant spending, Chris still tried to hide the fact that he was deeply in debt. Chris gradually found himself struggling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was ticking away and fearful of losing everything. However, during a conversation with a friend about houses, Chris insisted that he would never sell Osbaston house. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his flashy and knowing that his time and money were running out, Chris repeatedly sought professional help. He confided in the doctor, revealing his feelings of depression and suicidal thoughts. He started taking antidepressants. In August 2008, Chris came across a letter from his house managers posted on the front gate. The letter reported that they planned to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. The housekeeper said that when she showed Chris the letter, Chris appeared confused but remained silent. The nightmare that Chris had been avoiding had now become a harsh reality. He was on the brink of losing all his material possessions. The thought of Kirsty and Jill losing their familiar lifestyle was unbearable for Christopher. His family faced the possibility of returning to Wolverhampton, saying goodbye to their lavish lifestyle. For a proud man like Chris, such a situation would have been extremely humiliating. On August 21, 2008, a friend contacted Chris via text message to ask about his health, and he replied, "Not good, things are about to happen to me." On August 25, 2008, the Foster's family received an invitation to a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting event. They then joined the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of difficulty in the Fosters. Witnesses recalled that Chris appeared happy. Their family still exuded happiness without knowing what Chris had planned that night. Chris informed Jill that he wanted to leave the gathering. Although Jill wanted to stay a little longer, they eventually left around 8:30 p.m., arriving home just a few minutes later at 8:44 p.m., their route captured by home security footage. Soon after, Jill went to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirsty, urging her to go to bed while continuing to text a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, causing Kirsty to end her conversation with her friend and go to bed. At 3 a.m., Chris began his violent rampage. He entered Jill's room and used a silencer to shoot her in the head while she was sleeping. Next, he went to Kirsty's room and killed her in the same way. Home security cameras recorded Chris's actions as he carried a shotgun outside the dog cage, killing each dog with a shot to the head. He then went to the stables and killed the horses before burning the stables with the animals inside. Chris appeared expressionless in the video. To prevent firefighters from reaching the house, Chris blocked the main entrance, shooting at the tires to make movement more difficult. He also pumped 200 liters of oil from the family's tank into the house's basement through connecting pipes. It is clear that Chris took deliberate steps to completely destroy the Osbaston house. His actions appeared to have been motivated by a desire to prevent others from acquiring property that he could not keep. Chris burned down his house and covered his car and belongings in oil. The fire quickly spread and destroyed everything. Chris, still carrying a rifle, went back into the house and lay down next to Jill's body in the bedroom, holding her as flames engulfed them. At 4:11 a.m., the security cameras stopped working. A neighbor saw the growing fire and called for help. Firefighters quickly arrived. The fire was too intense and difficult to control. As firefighters tried to put out the fire, neighbors watched the building burn, worried for those inside. In the following days, the media called in to search for Foster's family, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Because of Chris's wealth, the authorities opened an investigation, initially suspecting that the Foster family had been kidnapped. However, at the time, neither the bodies nor the security footage were found, so many speculated about what might have happened to them. It took 3 days for the fire to be completely extinguished. After the fire was extinguished, investigators carefully examined the house and found the bodies of Jill and Christopher on beds in a room that had collapsed into the living room. However, there was no sign of Kirsty. While some hoped she could have escaped, others feared she had been kidnapped. Sadly, Kirsty's remains were found in the rubble a few days later. Investigators used a brush to carefully collect her remains into a hearse. A fragment of Kirsty's skull revealed that she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, like her mother. After examining the body, the police began to suspect that Chris had committed a crime. At the same time, they began investigating his financial situation. When they dug deeper, they discovered that Chris, a seemingly successful businessman, was actually heavily in debt. His total debt had reached £4 million, and when creditors tried to take his assets, they discovered that Chris had intended to demolish the house to ensure that there was nothing left for them to take. Security footage confirmed the police's suspicions. Chris committed the murders and took his own life without leaving any explanation or warning. Speculation about the motives behind the brutal crime led to 2 main theories. One theory had suggested that Chris, feeling ashamed of having lost his fortune, chose to commit the heinous act to avoid admitting his failures. Another theory had proposed that Chris, being self-centered, decided to destroy everything rather than face the possibility of loss. However, Enid had disagreed with these theories. She had firmly believed that Chris acted out of love for his family, trying to protect them from financial ruin. She had defended him and felt a deep sense of sympathy for his situation. In contrast, Chris's brother Andrew had held a very different view. Despite not speaking for 16 years, Andrew had briefly considered reconciling with Chris for their mother's sake. However, his fear of a hostile encounter had kept him from reaching out. Andrew had alleged that Chris had bullied and sexually assaulted him during their childhood, leading to a tumultuous relationship. Andrew had maintained that Chris exhibited bullying and controlling behavior. Andrew's attempts to reconcile with Chris in 1999 had been met with resistance. Chris had responded to Andrew's letter with a demand for a written apology, stating that Andrew would have to beg and scrape on bended knee to make amends. Andrew had believed that Chris refused to acknowledge his past wrongdoings and instead held on to long-standing grudges. For months after the tragedy, on December 19, 2008, a joint funeral had been held for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill at their local village church. The service had been quiet and respectful, attended by close friends and family. Both Kirsty and Jill had been buried in the same plot, as requested by Jill's family. Chris had received a private funeral and was buried elsewhere. In the years following the tragedy, the remains of the burnt-out house and the family's charred belongings had been left on the site. These had included Kirsty's first aid book for her horses and a handwritten note detailing the family's meal plans for the week of the tragedy. The ruins of the house had remained until 2011 when the debris had been cleared. The 16-acre estate had been sold in 2014, with plans to build a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property had been put up for sale in 2012, it had taken 2 years to sell, reportedly after the price had been reduced. The reasons behind Christopher Foster's actions may have been financial struggles and the pressure to maintain a wealthy image. However, this had not justified the horrific outcome. Instead of having made sensible financial decisions or confiding in his loved ones, Chris had chosen a destructive path that had had devastating consequences for everyone involved. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Vincent Brothers. Vincent Brothers was born on May 30, 1962, in Long Island, New York. From a young age, he was known for his charisma, reliability, and diligence. He also served in the Marine Corps Reserves. After graduating from Norfolk State University, Vincent moved to California in the mid-1980s to pursue further education and eventually earned a master's degree. Despite having a successful career as a school administrator, Vincent's personal life was marred by tumultuous relationships. His two previous marriages ended in divorce. In 1988, while working at California State University in Bakersfield, Vincent had a daughter with his girlfriend. He took his girlfriend to court to establish paternity and was eventually awarded custody and visitation rights. Initially required to pay $350 per month in child support, this amount was increased to $771 in 2003. That same year, Vincent was convicted of wife abuse and received a 6-day jail sentence and probation. In 1992, Vincent married for the second time, but this marriage also ended in divorce in 1996 due to accusations of intimidation and physical abuse by his second wife. While serving as the assistant principal at Emerson High School, Vincent was accused of sexually harassing a colleague. The woman claimed that Vincent assaulted her at his home and took her phone to prevent her from calling the police. When she tried to report the incident to the police, she said police discouraged her from pursuing charges because she was afraid of Vincent's reputation. The harassment continued at school, with Vincent allegedly touching her inappropriately. The woman eventually resigned from her job as a teacher, citing an unfriendly work environment. The school district investigated Vincent due to his increasingly threatening behavior and threatening phone calls. Despite Vincent denying the allegations and having no disciplinary record, the school district transferred him to another school as a precaution. Vincent then began working at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California, where he also became famous and respected. Vincent was especially known for ensuring the safety of students by taking them home after school. While teaching at Fremont Elementary School, Vincent met Joni Harper, the school's security supervisor and basketball manager. Vincent and Joni began dating and eventually married after the birth of their first child, Marcus. Their family grew with the arrival of their second child, Lindsay, in 2000. However, Vincent's infidelity caused him and Joni to divorce in September 2001. 2 years later, Vincent and Joni remarried in secret, and their third child, Marshall, was born 4 months later. Joni eventually opened up to her friends about the problems in her marriage. Unlike before, she expressed her fear that Vincent might harm her. However, to those around them, Vincent's family appeared happy and actively involved in the community, often attending local events and maintaining good relationships with others. From the outside, Joni and Vincent's marriage seemed stable. Joni continued to work as a basketball manager, pursuing her passion. However, no one expected that the tragic events hidden behind the family's happy exterior would soon emerge. 3 months before the tragic event, Vincent had moved out of the house due to frequent arguments with his mother-in-law, Ernestine. On July 6, 2003, Joni attended a church service with her 3 children, Marcus, Lindsay, and 6-week-old Marshall, as well as her mother, Ernestine. The family had lunch at Black Angus after the ceremony, then returned home for a nap. As was their custom, Joni and the children stayed in one bedroom, while Ernestine stayed in another room in the house. Tragically, the family was attacked in their home. The killer easily entered the house without signs of forced entry and shot Joni twice in the head while she was in the bedroom. Lindsay was also shot in the back. The noise alerted Ernestine, causing her to quickly arm herself with a .38 revolver and move toward the hallway to investigate. Unfortunately, she was killed before she could defend herself. The attacker shot Ernestine twice in the face, causing her to collapse in the hallway outside her bedroom. The attacker then entered the room and shot Marcus, followed by a fatal shot to the baby's back. Each shot was aimed very carefully. Instead of fleeing the scene immediately, the attacker went to the kitchen to get a knife and then returned to the bedroom. There, the attacker stabbed the victims multiple times in the back. On July 8, 2003, Kelsey Spann, Joni's best friend, became worried when she had not heard from Joni, Bernstein, and Joni's children since they went to church the previous Sunday. Kelsey decided to go to Joni's house to check on them using the key Joni had given her. When she tried to unlock the door, she found it difficult to open due to an obstacle. She then went to the back of the house and found an unlocked sliding glass door, which was unusual. Upon entering the house, Kelsey discovered Joni, her mother Ernestine, and Marcus, Lindsay, and Marshall, all dead. Kelsey immediately contacted authorities at 7 a.m. They arrived at the scene and discovered 5 family members brutally murdered. The family's peaceful home, located in a quiet neighborhood, became the scene of a horrific crime. The police investigation concluded that the family had been tragically killed on Sunday afternoon as they returned from church. Before leaving the scene, the perpetrator covered the bodies in the bedroom with blankets and pillows taken from other rooms. Detectives identified Joni as the primary target due to the severity of her injuries, suggesting the attacker had been extremely angry. Police were concerned about Vincent's safety and discovered he had been in Ohio. Detective Watts traveled to North Carolina, where Vincent was visiting his mother with his brother Melvin. When North Carolina police met with Vincent, they found him severely traumatized and unable to speak coherently, which did not provide many details about the investigation. Vincent's behavior was inconsistent with that of a murderer, and because he had been on the other side of the country when the murder occurred, police initially ruled him out as a suspect. He also provided receipts showing purchases made around the time of the tragedy, confirming that he had not been in Bakersfield, California, where the incident occurred. However, Detective Watts still doubted Vincent's innocence. Notably, Vincent never asked how his wife and children had died, which aroused suspicion. On July 11, 2003, Vincent had returned to Los Angeles without attending their family's memorial service, but Vincent had attended their funeral 5 days later. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Vincent had moved out of his family home in April 2003. Additionally, his wife, Joni, had been planning to divorce him again and had sought child support. Authorities also discovered that Vincent had had a history of violence against women, which had led them to take a closer look at his alibi. Upon further investigation, surveillance video from the store's checkout counters had shown that Melvin, not Vincent, had made the purchase at that time. When confronted, Melvin revealed that Vincent had told him to make these purchases in Vincent's name. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find any witnesses who had seen Vincent between the evening of July 4th and the evening of July 7th. Both Melvin and his family insisted they had not seen Vincent during this time. Although there was no direct evidence linking Vincent to the murder, police discovered he had some suspicious activities. Vincent had rented a car when he had arrived in Columbus, Ohio, and he had stayed at his brother's house. Police suspected Vincent had flown to Columbus on July 2, 2003 to visit family, then returned to Bakersfield on July 4, where the tragic incident had occurred on July 6. He was supposed to return to Ohio on July 7 and had arrived late that evening. Law enforcement had conducted a thorough inspection of the Dodge vehicle, paying special attention to its radiator and air filter. To help identify insects found in the car, investigators had enlisted the expertise of Dr. Lynn Kimsey from the Bohart Museum of Entomology at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Kimsey carefully had analyzed the insects and identified more than 100 species, including several species found only in the western region beyond the Rocky Mountains. The presence of some insects suggested that Vincent had moved at night. By carefully analyzing the insects, Dr. Kimsey had been able to plot a path that showed the car had traveled west from Ohio. Investigators later had tracked down the 5 previous car renters and confirmed that none of them had driven the car to California or near the Rocky Mountains. Police also had examined photographic evidence and found the end of a rubber glove in the laundry room. DNA testing showed a match. It belonged to none other than Vincent Brothers. Detective Watts had discovered that Vincent had been planning to leave town and had begun selling his assets, including putting his house on the market. As a result, Vincent had been arrested on April 30, 2004 and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 2007, with prosecutor Lisa Green leading the case. The prosecution argued that Vincent's motive for the murder had been financial, suggesting he had acted out of fear of having to pay child support due to his impending divorce from Joni. The prosecution portrayed Vincent as a serial adulterer who often had disappeared for long periods of time and who could become violent. To support their case, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Dr. Lynn Kimsey, who testified that the insects found in the Dodge were consistent with insects commonly found along Interstate 70. This testimony was further supported by evidence showing 5,424 miles had been driven from July 2 to July 11 in accordance with the prosecution's statement. However, when Melvin had appeared in court, he tried to change his previous testimony, claiming that he had lied to the police about Vincent giving him a credit card to use. In response, the defense presented an expert on high-speed driving, who argued that maintaining an average speed of 70 miles per hour during the trip from Ohio to California had been extremely difficult. The defense also presented its pathologists, who testified that the murders could have occurred as late as Monday morning, July 7, 2003. The defense also had presented interrogation tapes to prove that Melvin had been pressured by police to change his statement. Additionally, they called a witness who claimed to have seen a car accident involving Vincent on Sunday morning, in which a boy on a bicycle had collided with Vincent's rental car at an intersection. Although the incident had not been reported to the police due to the lack of damage or injuries, the prosecution attempted to verify the story. Vincent had taken it upon himself to defend himself. He had strongly denied all accusations about his married life and had firmly denied the accusation of murdering his family. Throughout his testimony, Vincent had become emotional and had shed tears several times. The prosecution had called Carla Tuya, principal of Franklin School, as a witness. She had testified about her past relationship with Vincent, which had begun in 1996 when his son was born and had ended in 2002 when she had decided to end it. Carla revealed a shocking secret that she and Vincent had been intimate just weeks before the family tragedy, directly contradicting Vincent's previous denials about everything. This admission had damaged Vincent's claim to fidelity to his family. The prosecution had argued that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. Thanks to knowing the family's Sunday habits, the murderer had gained an advantage and had had the opportunity to strike. The perpetrator had taken advantage of this and had waited until the whole family was asleep, then had used the spare key to enter the house through the sliding glass door and had killed each family member. On May 15, 2017, Vincent had been found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, making him eligible for the death penalty. The jury had reached this decision after hearing testimony from 137 witnesses and deliberating for nearly 2 days. After the verdict, Vincent had been removed from the courtroom and had been returned to the Luro detention facility under tight security. Then, on September 27, 2007, Durr County Superior Court Judge Michael Bush had sentenced Vincent Brothers to death by lethal injection. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Nicole Peets. Nicole Peets was born on February 26, 1973 in King County, Washington. Nicole was the only child in her family and her parents divorced when she was in school. During her high school years, Nicole was an active, sociable, athletic girl who was well-liked by many people. She had many friends and enjoyed field trips to the countryside. After graduating from high school, Nicole studied public relations at Western Washington College. At the same time, Nicole was still actively involved in sports. Nicole took a coaching position at a local sports club. Nicole quickly gained the respect of her colleagues, and Nicole attracted many customers to her classes. After graduating from college, Nicole decided to continue her education to improve her management skills. She found a job at a large mobile communications company. Nicole's personality is friendly, sociable, and willing to help people, but few people know that inside she is suffering from a lot of pain and suffering. Nicole's teenage years were severely affected by alcoholism. The divorce of her parents was a huge shock to her fragile psyche. Her rebellious nature and bad friends influenced her, and she began drinking. All of this led to a serious alcoholism that lasted for many years and completely undermined Nicole's physical and mental health. At that time, Nicole's mother, Gail, worked as a flight attendant and was often away from home because of her busy work. Therefore, Gail did not realize the change in Nicole. Nicole lives with her elderly grandmother, who also did not realize that her granddaughter regularly drank alcohol. When the truth was revealed, alcoholism had caused severe damage to Nicole. To help Nicole, Gail, her mother, accompanied Nicole to support her. Gail accompanied Nicole to therapy and alcoholism meetings, helping Nicole open up and overcome her cravings. At that time, Nicole's mother Gail had remarried, and Gail's new husband, Robert, was supportive of his stepdaughter, loving Nicole like his own daughter and believing that Nicole could overcome her alcoholism. Nicole took treatment very seriously. She did not miss a single meeting and quickly overcame her addiction. However, alcohol caused many health problems for Nicole. She had serious problems with her pancreas that required surgery. In addition, her alcoholism at a young age had seriously affected her fertility, making it impossible for Nicole to have children. In the mid-1990s, when Nicole was recovering from her addiction and living sober again, Nicole met David. At the time, Nicole had just gotten a job at a sports club, and David was a regular at the club. David was a tall, handsome young man. David was immediately attracted to Nicole, an attractive trainer, and David began to show interest in her. David, who was 4 years younger than Nicole, soon developed a relationship that lasted almost 8 years, and it was not until 2002 that the couple decided to marry. David and Nicole had a simple wedding in Hawaii, inviting only their closest friends. After their marriage, the newlyweds bought their own house and began to settle down in the town of Linwood, Washington. Nicole was a friendly and outgoing young woman who quickly made friends and built good relationships with her neighbors. Nicole loved animals and had several dogs. Because she could not have children, Nicole devoted all her love to these pets. David and Nicole were a perfect couple. They often went for walks with their dogs and always had happy smiles on their faces. Nicole loved to cook, and she was a very good cook. Nicole often treated her husband to delicious meals cooked by herself. In 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday, Nicole mysteriously disappeared. That day, for the first time, she did not attend an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, where she was the leader and inspiration for the group. Nicole also did not come to work, making her colleagues even more worried. In the evening, her mother, Gail, felt very worried when she could not contact Nicole all day, which had never happened before. Gail called Nicole's husband, David, to find out what was going on. However, David could not contact Nicole either. David said that David and Nicole had argued a little the day before, so when he tried calling Nicole the next day and got no response, he thought that Nicole was still angry with him. David did not rush to find Nicole right away, but waited until the evening to ask for her forgiveness. However, Nicole still did not come home that night. Nicole's family tried to contact her by phone but received no response. They decided to go to the police to report the incident. However, the police did not immediately accept their report because Nicole was an adult and had only been missing for less than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day after Nicole went missing that the police began searching. When Nicole did not appear and her phone was unreachable, the police decided to start searching from where she was last seen, which was her and David's house. However, after investigating, the police did not find any clues or unusual signs that Nicole had been kidnapped or that something had happened to her in that house. And Nicole's car was also missing with her, suggesting that she may have left on her own and did not want to return. Her mother Gail and stepfather Robert did not wait for the police to wait the required time and began the search themselves. They appealed to all concerned through social media to help in the search and share any relevant information about Nicole's location. Nicole's father and mother also took the first flight to Linwood, where they began searching for Nicole themselves, handing out flyers with her photo and asking people who knew her. The police searched for Nicole and her car. They tried to determine the route the car had taken on the day Nicole went missing. But there were no clues. The next morning a man was jogging when he took a shortcut through an area that was very sparsely populated. As he passed through that area, he noticed something strange in the bushes. As he got closer, he realized it was the severely mutilated body of a naked woman. He immediately called the police and reported the incident. The police quickly arrived at the scene. At the scene was the body of a young woman without any clothes on. Based on the number of bruises and scratches, the victim had been brutally beaten. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation with bare hands. The police suspected that the body was Nicole Peets, who had been missing for several days. When Nicole's mother, Gail, went to the morgue to identify the body, Gail fainted when she saw the body, and her husband, Robert, was also very sad. As for Nicole's husband, David, he did not show any signs of grief. This made everyone around David feel a little suspicious of his reaction. The police continued to search for Nicole's car, hoping to find traces of the killer in the car. Information about the missing car was widely publicized in the media, along with a call for people to contact the police if they saw the car. Some time later, a gray Volkswagen Polo was found in a parking lot on the outskirts of town. The security guard there discovered the car when he realized that it had been left there for a long time. At the time, he did not know that the car was involved in this serious murder. The police took the car for inspection and examined it to look for evidence and clues to help track down the criminal. However, after the inspection, they found no traces, except for the fingerprints and DNA traces of Nicole and her husband David. Without finding any concrete evidence, the police returned the car to David. The truth is that Nicole was brutally murdered, but the motive for the crime remains unclear. In addition, the carjacking theory is unlikely, as the car was abandoned shortly after on the other side of town. Nicole Peets' case remains unsolved after nearly a year of investigation. There have been no new leads or leads in the search for the perpetrator. No one saw the suspect leave his car in the parking lot because it was not crowded and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. What is suspicious is that Nicole's case has been kept secret. Information about the investigation and new evidence has not been disclosed to the family. Nicole's relatives have not been fully updated, only receiving small details. Nicole's bank card was used at a gas station after she went missing. Although the police have collected images from the cameras, they have not yet disclosed the results of the investigation. When Nicole's case did not progress and the perpetrator was still at large, Nicole's parents decided to conduct an investigation themselves. They hired a private investigator to gather information, verify some suspicions, and offer a reward for anyone who could provide useful information. The reward was initially $10,000 and later increased to $35,000, but no new leads were found. David initially showed great interest in investigating Nicole's disappearance for the first 6 months. However, after that time, He began to distance himself and had little contact with his in-laws, and David eventually remarried and had children of his own. The news of David's remarriage and children of his own came as a huge shock to Nicole's mother, Gail, because Nicole was unable to have children and was often blamed by David. A grief-stricken Gail repeatedly hinted that the culprit might be her son-in-law. 6 years later, Nicole's case took an unexpected turn. David was arrested as the prime suspect in the case. David did not expect that he himself would be the focus of this investigation. Previously, David had changed his residence and lost contact with Nicole's family, so he thought that the case was over and no one was looking for him. However, David was very surprised when the police raided and arrested him. At that time, David even declared his innocence and was willing to take a lie detector test, but he failed the test. As for the police, they suspected David from the beginning, but lacked concrete evidence. In order to arrest David, the police gathered a lot of evidence to ensure that he was responsible for the crime. In fact, David himself probably thought that he had committed the crime perfectly and would never be discovered. A video from the gas station provided an important clue. Footage of the moment a man paid with Nicole's card showed that the man looked similar to David. Although the man was wearing a hat and sunglasses, making identification more difficult, the footage was a key clue in the case. Police also discovered that Nicole was not wearing her wedding ring. Nicole never left the house without it. Initially, police thought the ring had been stolen with other items, but the box containing the ring was later found on a dressing table in Nicole's home. Police discovered a mouth guard in Nicole's mouth during the autopsy. This was a device Nicole had been prescribed shortly before the tragedy, as she suffered from uncontrollable spasms of her chewing muscles due to anxiety, which led to worn enamel and chipped teeth. The presence of this device suggested that Nicole may have been murdered while she was still asleep in her bed. It is possible that David had forgotten that his wife was using a mouth guard because she had only recently started using it. In addition, the police examined the traces left in Nicole's car. Only David's and Nicole's fingerprints were found in the car. No traces of anyone else were found, suggesting that there was no third person involved in the murder. The investigation also shed light on Nicole and David's family situation at the time. David did not hold any permanent jobs and preferred to spend his time in bars and clubs, where David spent all of Nicole's earnings on alcohol and other women. The family was facing serious financial problems, and the situation became worse over time. Nicole tried to convince David to change his lifestyle and attend alcohol rehabilitation meetings to help David get back on track. However, David's response was indifferent and insulting. David had affairs with many women. Nicole's mother Gail knew about the serious problems in Nicole's family and tried to convince Nicole to leave David. However, Nicole did not want to do so because she loved David and hoped he would change. After Nicole's death, her husband David quickly received a large insurance payout and started a new relationship. Before that, David had been having an affair with a girl named Jane for several months. David often spent time with her at bars and clubs when Nicole was busy working or studying. Before Nicole's birthday, David brought his mistress home, where they were caught by Nicole. This incident became the cause of an argument in the family. Nicole told her mother about the incident, and a few days later, she mysteriously disappeared. Because Gail knew everything, she suspected David from the beginning. However, the police said that the evidence collected was too little to arrest the suspect. The case was kept secret and the family was never heard from again. When David received a large insurance payout after Nicole's death, he spent the money with his mistress, Jane. David appeared in court in September 2013 for his crimes. David received the maximum sentence possible under the laws of the state where the case was tried. David served 18 years in prison. However, in 2025, he could be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Graciela Garcia. Graciela Garcia was born on October 6, 1971, in Mexico. Her family was working class and they hoped to provide a better future for their children. As a result, her parents decided to move to the United States and eventually settled in Hermiston, Oregon. Graciela was too young to remember the hardships of the move. She attended Umatilla High School, a low-cost school where 66% of the student body was Hispanic. Graciela made friends easily and stood out with her outgoing. She later studied business at Blue Mountain College. However, since she was young, she has had a passion for hairdressing and has had the goal of owning her own hair salon. With passion and hard work, Graciela believed that her plans could come true with the right approach. By February 2006, she had become the owner of Carr's Beauty Salon. Thanks to her talent and charisma, she quickly became famous in society. Moreover, her professional image also contributed to the prestige of the salon. She is passionate about her work and has a deep understanding of new beauty trends. Thanks to that, she always has a loyal customer base. Some of her customers have become close friends and are often invited to her home. She is respected and loved by everyone in town. Her private life is also filled with joy and happiness. She was pursued by many men when she was young, but she only loved one. That man became her first love. They have two beautiful daughters, Annabelle and Gabriella, often called Gabby. However, that love did not last long. The man left the family. It seems that his feelings for her faded over time. Despite becoming a single mother, she did not feel hopeless. Instead, she focused on self-improvement and pursued a degree in cosmetology. After her divorce, Graciela met Romero Sanchez, a regular customer at the beauty salon where she worked. At first, their relationship was just a friendship. However, Romero later asked Graciela out. And she accepted. Gradually, their relationship became closer and deeper. However, when Graciela introduced Romero to her family, they felt uncomfortable because of his cold and distant attitude. Annabelle and Gabby, Graciela's two daughters, tried many times to connect with Romero, but he did not respond. Graciela's children were confused by such behavior, but they attributed it to personality differences. Graciela's partner seemed to be a strange and unapproachable person, which puzzled the people around her. They could not believe that a woman as full of life and fun as her could be so passionately in love with such a dry person. However, they still respected her decision. When Graciela announced her upcoming marriage, everyone showed their support and shared her joy. Especially Annabelle and Gabby, they wanted to see her happy and loved. On the wedding day, guests also noticed Romero's arrogance and conceit. Some thought he seemed too jealous when trying to steal all the bride's attention. When Graciela's young grandchildren came to congratulate the newlyweds, Romero treated them with contempt, making them feel uncomfortable. Afterwards, Graciela's relatives could not hide their true feelings about this man. Annabelle even openly stated that she did not consider him a stepfather and just wanted to maintain a normal relationship like other families. After the wedding, the Graciela family had two more sons, Arthur and Jacob. They moved in together at Graciela's house. Graciela's youngest son, Jacob, noticed that Romero began to act as if he were the sole owner of the house. Initially, Graciela tried to set personal boundaries, but because she did not like confrontation, she quickly gave in to Romero. He was hot-tempered and never gave in or apologized first. To avoid creating tension in the family, Graciela continued to give in to Romero. However, over time, Graciela began to realize that she had rushed into this marriage. In conversations with her relatives, Graciela confessed that she felt constrained and oppressed. Her husband controlled her and did not let her go anywhere alone. Despite this, Graciela never said she wanted to leave this abusive relationship. It seems she still loves him. Graciela's family gradually realized that she had become attached to the wrong man. Romero not only controlled Graciela but also lived off of his wife, much to her family's dismay. Romero was a skilled manipulator, constantly stalking Graciela, controlling her correspondence, and even threatening to break up the friendship between Graciela and her friends. He did not want to let her go anywhere, or sometimes he would show up unexpectedly, as if testing her loyalty. His jealousy became excessive and uncontrollable. She felt ashamed and self-conscious because of his behavior, and as a result, she limited her social life. She only communicated with her family and no longer connected with friends or colleagues as before. This seriously affected her work, as her profession required her to communicate regularly with clients and attend various events. Her friends and colleagues noticed a change in Graciela. She was no longer the cheerful and bright woman she used to be. She looked sad and tired, and she was clearly unhappy. Her children also noticed that she had changed in both her mood and appearance. They saw that she had lost her independence and confidence. After discussing it with each other, Graciela's family agreed that they did not like Romero. However, since he was Graciela's choice, there was not much they could do to change the situation. They could only respect her decision. Other relatives also expressed doubts about Romero, but no one knew how to help her in this situation. Graciela and Romero needed help with their relationship, and Gabby had mentioned this to her mother. However, Graciela believed that she would manage her personal life on her own. In 2018, Graciela decided to move her salon to her home for convenience. However, her family was skeptical as they had not heard about the plan for 12 years. Some customers commented that Romero's constant presence at the salon made them feel uncomfortable. Some people thought that Graciela moved the salon home to solve the problem, but others doubted that the idea came from Romero. However, Graciela was happy about the change and believed that working from home would bring her closer to Jacob and Romero. At the end of the year, she and her husband renovated a room into a beauty salon, completing it in May 2019. The salon closed shortly after, but Graciela's reputation remained intact, and rumors of her reopening attracted many customers, including new ones. Graciela was delighted with her career success, but became increasingly secretive about her personal life. However, after 17 years of marriage, Graciela and Romero decided to separate. Romero always kept in touch with their children and saw them regularly. Graciela and her ex-husband shared custody of their youngest son, while the other children were grown and living on their own, but they still kept in regular contact with their family and participated in family activities. Graciela went through the divorce with a calm and optimistic attitude. After the divorce, Graciela focused on developing her beauty salon and spent her free time taking care of her family and close friends. On the morning of November 9, 2019, Romero visited Graciela's eldest daughter, Annabelle, and reported Graciela missing. According to Romero, Graciela and he had been together the night before. However, when he woke up the next morning, he was surprised to find that she was no longer there. Romero tried to contact Graciela but received no response. Annabelle was shocked by the news and Romero's reaction. He cried and appeared distressed. This made Annabelle feel strange because Romero usually did not show emotions in front of them. Romero also said that Graciela had been acting strangely recently, even hinting that she might have found another man in her life. Annabelle felt that Romero's words were insincere and his tears seemed fake, which made her start to doubt his behavior and worry about her mother. Romero usually avoided communicating with his wife's children. But after a while, he changed and decided to connect with them. After Romero left, Annabelle decided to inform the rest of the family about what had happened. Graciela's family gathers to find out what's happening to her. Graciela's car was parked in the driveway. If she decided to leave Romero, she would definitely use her own car. Another thing that surprised them was the neatness of Graciella's house. Everything was perfectly arranged and in order, far beyond normal. However, this was completely contrary to Graciella's personality and lifestyle, because if she went somewhere, her belongings and accessories would be scattered all over the room. Normally, Graciella would spend a lot of time in front of the mirror choosing her outfit for the day. However, the fact that she went out without any jewelry worried the whole family, and they wondered why. As she walked around the house, Gabby noticed something strange. The large blanket had been put in the washing machine, something her mother never did. The blanket was too heavy and someone else had washed it, apparently Romero, which made Gabby suspicious. Romero did not explain this, saying that he did not pay attention to such details. But then people realized that several important items were missing from the house, including Graciella's passport, driver's license, and cell phone. This raised further suspicions about Romero's actions. On November 11th, Annabelle contacted law enforcement at the police station and discovered something surprising. Although Romero had known about his wife's disappearance since the 9th or possibly earlier, he had not notified the police. Therefore, Annabelle was the first to file a missing persons report to her mother. Another incident raised concerns about Graciella's safety. She asked Gabby to pick her up, but even though Gabby said it would take some time because of the distance, Graciella continued to ask. Gabby was surprised by this unexpected request for help. Graciella explained that everything was fine and that her request was just a result of an argument with Romero. When they met, Graciella appeared relaxed, smiling and asking her daughter not to worry. She believed that arguments between lovers were just a form of renewal in their relationship. However, after they broke up, Gabby remained uneasy and became increasingly worried about her mother. The investigation began after Annabelle contacted the police. This caused the relationship between Graciella's family and Romero to deteriorate. Romero seemed angry that Graciella's family had notified law enforcement about her disappearance. Romero gave an official statement about his wife's disappearance. He said that Graciella either wanted to be alone or that she had moved in with another man and would be back soon. That was his answer every time someone asked. However, the police did not ignore this report. Officers launched an investigation into the missing Graciella's disappearance, considering the possibility that she may have been a victim of a crime. They started by searching her house, where her relatives reported that only a few personal items were missing. Without finding any other suspicious signs, the investigation expanded to include interviews with her children, Romero, and other close family members, including her ex-husband. However, no useful information was gathered from these interviews. While everyone expressed doubts about Romero's behavior, he cooperated fully with the detectives, allowing them to search his home, answering questions, providing his DNA, and taking a polygraph test. Despite this cooperation, there was insufficient evidence to prove his involvement in the case. Further investigation revealed that Graciella's phone last sent a signal near a bridge in Washington on November 9th at 12:30 p.m. After that, her phone was turned off. Her bank accounts and social media accounts showed no activity, suggesting that she had not accessed since her disappearance. Hundreds of witnesses were questioned, and all the places she regularly visited were checked, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. The investigators found her disappearance to be highly suspicious, as it seemed she had vanished without leaving any clues. For months into the investigation, the Hermiston Police Department announced that they had found no reliable information about Graciella's last whereabouts. Although Romero had not reported her missing, he was not accused of any wrongdoing. Graciella's family became increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress despite their constant contact with authorities throughout the incident. However, as time passed, these updates became less frequent and eventually stopped, forcing Graciella's children to take initiative and contact the police station themselves to inquire about the status of the case. In an effort to reinvigorate the search, Graciella's family turned to the media in March 2020, seeking public assistance and attention. They hoped that by sharing their story, they might gather new information. Graciella's daughter Gabby was mainly in charge of communicating with the press. She expressed her family's increasing frustration with the lack of progress in the case and criticized the police for not keeping them informed for such a long time. She urged investigators to focus more on finding her mother, Graciella, and to take a closer look at the suspicious circumstances surrounding disappearance. Graciella's family suspected something was wrong, as the condition of her belongings was strange and unusual in her home. However, it was unclear who would want to harm her, as Graciella did not appear to have any enemies. The family also believed that Graciella would not have left on her own, as she would have contacted them to reassure. Posters and flyers describing Graciella were scattered throughout the city in search of clues to the case. Graciella, who is 49 years old, Latina, 1.6 meters tall, 62 kilograms, and with dyed blonde hair. Local residents were also asked to be vigilant and report any information that might help the investigation. Her children were so concerned that they asked for a new detective team to take over the case, as they suspected bias in collaboration with a suspect, Romero, who was acquainted with the original investigators. The Graciella family expressed concerns about several inconsistencies in the investigation, including the fact that Romero's phone was turned off on the day of Graciella's disappearance. Additionally, Romero's calm behavior raised suspicions, as it didn't with the typical reaction expected from someone whose loved one has suddenly gone missing. As a result, the Graciella family demanded that the suspect be arrested immediately. Police Chief Jason Edmiston responded to allegations surrounding Graciella's disappearance, confirming that her case is being treated as suspicious and possibly involving foul play. However, he emphasized that this is just one theory and that the investigation remains impartial, driven by evidence. Edmiston also dismissed claims of social connections between Romero and law enforcement as baseless. Edmiston noted that the spread of misinformation has hindered the investigation. Certain information must be kept confidential, and authorities have sought assistance from the FBI. The police chief expressed frustration over public criticism of the police's actions. Separately, Gabby organized a fundraiser to hire a private detective, a move seen as a critique of the police's handling of the investigation. This perceived criticism suggested that the police were not doing enough to find Graciella. 1 year after Graciella disappeared, her family organized a memorial gathering. Here, friends and people who knew her shared stories about her lively and cheerful personality. They prayed for her safe return, lit candles, and later placed signs outside the police station, urging authorities to continue the search for Graciella Garcia. In September 2023, a major development in the case occurred when Romero Sanchez was severely injured in an attack and that required surgery. There was speculation that the shooter was Mason Garcia, Graciella's brother. The attack suggests that Graciella's family had become frustrated with the lack of progress in the investigation and took matters into their own hands, potentially leading to further tragedy. The disappearance of Graciella Garcia remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family in a state of agonizing. This has significantly affected the health and mental well-being of her family. Living without knowing what happened to a loved one can be more challenging than coping with a confirmed loss. It remains unknown whether Graciella is alive or not. Her children continue to hope that the truth will soon be revealed and justice will be served to the criminals. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in her family. Although she grew up in love and wealth, her father, Thomas, founded his own computer company. When Kimberly was young, her parents divorced. Kimberly left to live with her mother, and she still kept in touch with her father. Her father Thomas spent weekends taking Kimberly out and spending all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she was faced with a difficult choice: to stay with her mother or her father. Since she did not want to leave her familiar environment, Kimberly decided to live with her father Thomas. Kim began living with Thomas. Kimberly grew up to be a well-behaved and sociable child. Over the years, Kimberly became a beautiful and humorous girl. In 1994, Kimberly began attending the College of Staten Island. At that time, she informed her father that she felt she was old enough to live on her own. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was worried about this decision but still praised her and decided not to object. Instead, Thomas promised to ensure that Kimberly had a safe place of her own. Her father Thomas bought an apartment for Kimberly in a wealthy area of the city. He also installed an alarm system for the apartment to ensure Kimberly's safety. To avoid having to park far from home, Thomas bought a parking space in the garage across the street. He also bought Kimberly a cell phone and a pager so they could stay in touch regularly. Kimberly works as an accountant at a company. She lives a normal life like other students, often participating in entertainment activities and parties. Although her father Thomas repeatedly asked her to return to live with him, Kimberly insisted on being independent. In early 1995, Kimberly's best friend Liz Pace's house was being renovated. Liz, along with her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their young son, came to Kimberly's house to ask for temporary accommodation. Out of kindness, Kimberly agreed to let Liz Pace's family stay. One day, Kimberly and Liz decided to go to a party. They got their makeup done, their hair done, and their outfits picked out. Afterwards, they had a great time and danced at the party. When the party was over, Kimberly drove Liz home in her 1994 white Honda Accord. However, Kimberly did not go up to the apartment with Liz because she had unfinished business. The two girls hugged and said goodbye. Liz returned to the apartment first. The next morning, when Kimberly did not show up for work, her co-workers contacted her father, Thomas, to inform him that Kimberly had not shown up for work. Kimberly's absence was unusual because she was always on time. Thomas was also unable to reach his daughter on her cell phone, which made him feel worried and had a bad feeling. Thomas decided to contact Kimberly's friends. However, no one had any information about where she had gone after leaving the party early in the morning of March 1st. When Thomas did not hear from her friends, Thomas decided to go to the police to report the incident. The police thought that Kimberly might have stayed at a friend's house overnight and would return soon, so they advised him to wait at least 24 hours. However, Thomas was not satisfied. He decided to conduct an investigation himself to find Kimberly. After learning of Kimberly's disappearance, Kimberly's mother met with a psychic after being introduced by a friend. Upon seeing Kimberly's photo, the psychic said that she was alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that Kimberly had been kidnapped by acquaintances and that Kimberly had tried to escape several times. She added that the danger came from several people and that one of them had a name that started with the letter J, and that this person was apparently the leader of the gang. Thomas, Kimberly's father, went to the places his daughter frequented and talked to many people, but did not get any important information. Thomas went to Kimberly's apartment and garage to check. When entering Kimberly's apartment, Thomas noticed a bright object lying on the floor near the wall. It turned out to be a small gold earring. Thomas remembered that he had given Kimberly this pair of earrings. Thomas put the earring in his pocket. After checking, Kimberly was not in the apartment either. Thomas only met Kimberly's best friend Liz and her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their 2-year-old child. Thomas knew about Kimberly letting Liz's family stay temporarily. But Thomas did not support this decision. When Thomas talked about Kimberly's situation, Liz's family was surprised and worried about Kimberly's disappearance. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Thomas then went to the police station a second time and insisted that they conduct a search. The police agreed to help him and began an investigation. The police began to investigate the date of Kimberly's disappearance on February 28. It was found that Kimberly went to college in the morning, then went to work. After work, Kimberly went home and had dinner. She then attended a party with Liz and returned home around 4 a.m. Kimberly then went to the parking lot, but the reason she was there at such an early hour is still unclear. Kimberly's bank account was also investigated. The police discovered that Kimberly had last used her bank card the evening before she went missing. The police assumed that Kimberly had been kidnapped. Due to the lack of concrete evidence, the police looked into the information that Kimberly's mother had received from the psychic. Witness interviews were then conducted. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. The police discovered that a total of 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's phone on the morning of March 1st. This surprised the police because of the large number of calls. However, Joshua explained that he had called all of his friends and acquaintances to find out where Kimberly had gone and why she had not stayed home overnight. Joshua said that he considered Kimberly to be like a sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, the police were able to identify the clothes that Kimberly was wearing. A portrait of her has been drawn and will be released to help in the search. In addition, the police have also noticed some distinctive tattoos on Kimberly's body. One of them is a scorpion, which corresponds to her zodiac sign. The other tattoo is located on her waist and represents the infinity sign in the form of two naked people parallel to each other. A search for the missing car has been launched. The police have checked all scrap yards and other places where the car could be dismantled for parts or sold. However, this search has not yielded any positive results. The police have advised Thomas to pay attention to letters and phone calls he receives, as it is possible that his daughter's kidnappers will contact Thomas and offer a ransom. At around 2 a.m. on March 4th, the emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was on fire at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Fire crews were called in to put out the fire. When the fire was finally extinguished, firefighters found a charred body in the basement of the building. Forensic experts revealed that the deceased was a young woman between the ages of 20 and 25. Some of her long black hair was still on her head. There were also traces of tape. The woman's legs were tied tightly, and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part was that she was still alive when the fire broke out, as evidenced by her lungs filled with smoke. In fact, the young woman had been brutally burned alive. Police suspect that the body may be that of Kimberly, who had gone missing. However, dental records need to be examined to confirm the identity. At the same time, experts have also analyzed the ashes to determine the victim's identity. When the autopsy was done, experts found no other traces besides the body. However, they found tattoos that matched the description of the missing woman. Records from the dental clinic also confirmed that this was how Kimberly Antonakis' body was found. A witness to the fire reported that he often walked his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely every time it passed the house. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it was discovered what had attracted the dog's attention. Kimberly tried to free herself and call for help. The dog had heard sounds coming from the basement thanks to its sensitive hearing, while humans cannot perceive it. When the police questioned the homeowner, it turned out that he had put the house up for sale and had been monitoring its condition through letters and receipts. However, this man had not checked the basement, only the house from the outside. The police decided to question Joshua again because they still had many unanswered questions about him. Notably, They also noticed an interesting coincidence that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua revealed to them about a friend who had not been contacted on the day Kimberly went missing. It was a young Russian man nicknamed Psycho who had a romantic relationship with Kimberly. The police decided to verify the information about this person and learned that Psycho was a Russian citizen who moved to the United States as a child, and that he later joined a gang and repeatedly broke the law. Thus, a suspicious suspect appeared and was soon arrested. During the interrogation, Psycho said that he knew about Kimberly's death. His reaction shocked the police because Psycho insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime, but also showed deep sorrow. It seems he is experiencing real emotions. After investigation, Psycho's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Kimberly's family decided to seek help from a psychic once again. This time, the psychic said she saw 4 people involved in the case. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to contact the family but were unable to do so. The abduction initially showed no signs of a tragic ending. Thomas then announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. Thomas could not forget the psychic's words. He began to think about what she had said about the kidnappers wanting to contact the family. He wondered what that meant and what was stopping them from doing so. When he returned home, Thomas remembered a small detail from the day Kimberly went missing. Thomas had listened to all the answering machine recordings because he hoped Kimberly would contact him. However, there was no voicemail except for 2 blank messages. When he turned them on, he heard nothing, just silence on the other end of the phone. Thomas mistook them for a technical malfunction or a communication problem. 5 days after Kimberly's body was discovered, the police found her car. It was parked in a quiet part of town, near the crime scene. The police hoped to find fingerprints in the car, but unfortunately the car had been washed. The only traces left in the car were a few strands of Kimberly's hair and an earring. During this time, Thomas was implicated in a local mafia hit. Some members of Thomas's crew even blamed him for their daughter's death, as if Thomas's dark actions had caused Kimberly's troubles. However, Thomas denied any involvement. The police investigated this information through their own channels but found no evidence to confirm it. Thomas did not appear to have had anything to do with the incident and continued his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by police at a New York City home for burglary. However, during questioning, he provided information related to Kimberly's case. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl alive. When the police learned that the man was Joshua Torres, who lived in Kimberly's apartment and had been involved in the search for her, they decided to take a closer look at Joshua Torres. Joshua was asked to come in for questioning and he denied any involvement in the incident. However, during a lengthy conversation, he made a confession. Joshua said that if he had really been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kimberly. This intrigued the police because there was no information given that Kimberly had died of hunger, thirst, or cold. Only the police knew this information. The police needed more evidence to clear up the case. After investigating, they discovered that Joshua Torres had a criminal record. Furthermore, he had no job and was living off Liz. Meanwhile, Liz worked to support both of them. Joshua took care of the child and had free time to secretly plan the crime. Joshua followed Kimberly and learned her habits, and kidnapped Kimberly and hid her in an abandoned house. But surprisingly, Joshua did not ask for ransom. During the investigation, the calls Joshua made that morning were analyzed. The results showed that Joshua had lied when he said he called Kimberly's friends and acquaintances. But when checked, most of the phone numbers were from random people who had nothing to do with Kimberly. When checking Joshua's pager data, the police discovered that Joshua had sent several strange messages on March 1st. These evidences gradually closed the circle around Joshua Torres. Finally, the police had a solid lead to arrest Joshua. When the police told Joshua that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect, Joshua changed his story. Joshua said that he suspected his friends of murdering Kimberly. Joshua confessed to assisting in the kidnapping. Joshua said he did not think Joshua's accomplices would decide to kill Kimberly. According to Joshua, they only wanted to demand ransom and release Kimberly, but the plan failed. When the kidnappers could not contact Thomas, even recorded a ransom message. However, for some reason, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers were angry that Thomas did not respond. The kidnappers were scared because the psychic said that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was released to the media and broadcast on TV. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, Joshua's accuser, Jose, was shot in the back of the head while he was with his wife. Jose's wife later admitted to the police that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to Joshua, and wanted to expose him. Police were able to establish details of the kidnapping and the crime through pager messages and statements from the suspects. The case involved 4 suspects: Joshua Torres, Julio Negrin, another man named Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett. It is worth noting that Julio had dated Kimberly and even intended to marry her. However, Kimberly rejected his proposal. Nicholas had just been released from prison before the kidnapping took place thanks to a bond from his mother. Nicholas had planned the incident while serving a prison sentence for serious crimes. Joshua had a criminal record dating back to his youth, including kidnapping and the legal use of weapons. A kidnapping had taken place, in which Joshua was the mastermind. Joshua directed the actions of the kidnapping group. When Kimberly returned from a party, the group of men attacked her in the parking lot. They had apparently been watching and waiting for Kimberly to be alone. To control Kimberly, they used guns to threaten Kimberly and force her to be quiet. They then tied Kimberly's hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. The group then put Kimberly in the trunk of their car and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took Kimberly into the basement and tied her to a chair. They also took off Kimberly's shoes to prevent her from making noise by tapping her feet. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed money and that they would release her when the money was paid. One of the kidnappers, Julio, was assigned to take care of her, bringing her food and water twice a day and keeping her warm. However, Julio left the house because he was afraid of the consequences. So, for 3 days, Kimberly had no food, no water, and was freezing. Immediately after kidnapping Kimberly, the kidnappers notified Joshua, who then demanded a ransom of $775,000 via an audio message. Joshua then called Thomas and left 2 empty audio messages. Therefore, Thomas ignored these calls. The kidnappers were waiting for a message from Thomas, but they did not understand why Thomas did not contact them. During this time, Kimberly was left alone and fainted several times due to dehydration, but Kimberly still managed to survive. The kidnappers did not receive the ransom and were afraid of being caught, so they decided to release Kimberly. When they went down to the basement, they found Kimberly unconscious. They thought Kimberly was dead and decided to get rid of all the evidence, including the hostage. The police knew that Joshua had directed the actions of his accomplices from inside the house, so Liz did not know that Joshua had kidnapped Kimberly. At the trial, Liz said that after being questioned, Joshua came to her and confessed everything. Joshua then beat her and threatened to kill her, before fleeing. Some time after the massacre, the police investigated Jose. He was also suspected of being involved in Kimberly's murder, but there was no direct evidence. Therefore, the police decided to take statements from the kidnappers. When questioning Joshua, he denied all involvement in the case. However, Julio decided to cooperate and gave an honest statement about the incident. Information from Julio allowed Joshua's role in the case to be determined, and Joshua was charged with Kimberly's murder. Therefore, Joshua, Julio and Nicholas were charged with related crimes such as murder, kidnapping and vandalism. At the trial, after more than 10 hours of debate, Joshua was finally sentenced to life in prison for 58 years, the same sentence that Nicholas Brett also received. Julio Negrin was convicted of complicity and sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison after the incident. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was pleased with the court's decision, because Thomas did not want criminals to be sentenced to death. In his eyes, the death penalty was not the most severe punishment. Nicholas experienced abuse and assault in prison many times, and after only 2 years of incarceration, Nicholas died of AIDS. Meanwhile, Julio was released after 2 years after completing his sentence. However, Joshua is still serving a longer sentence and cannot be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he is still alive at that time. In 2005, Thomas died of cancer. His family believes that Kimberly's death caused Thomas a lot of stress, and that cancer was part of that. The life of Kimberly Antonakos, a beautiful girl, ended suddenly and tragically. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Wright was born on April 24, 1976 in Houston, Texas. Her parents, Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright, lived a simple life and raised Susan and her older sister, Cindy. From a young age, Susan was an active, friendly, and talented child. During her school years, she participated in dancing activities and aspired to become a professional choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, Susan had many fans. However, after graduating from high school, Susan's dream of becoming a student did not come true. But she did not give up, and after a short break, she saved money to continue her studies. For a long time, Susan worked as a dancer at a famous nightclub in the city. However, she soon realized that this job was not for her and decided to leave. She then used her savings to study nursing at night at a university. With the goal of becoming independent, Susan balanced her studies with a job as a waitress at a restaurant to support herself. However, after a while, Susan realized that a career in medicine was not the right path for her, and paying for her tuition became difficult. Therefore, Susan decided to drop out of school and focus on her work. In 1997, Susan met Jeffrey Wright at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. She was 21 years old at the time, and Jeffrey went to the restaurant for a meal. From then on, their romantic relationship began. Jeffrey was immediately attracted to the blue-eyed blonde's beauty and bright smile. He left a generous tip and became a regular customer. Finally, he mustered up the courage to ask for Susan's phone number. Susan recalls that Jeffrey began calling her every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Jeffrey arranged romantic dates and small surprises like sending flowers and touching notes to Susan's workplace. In the evenings, Jeffrey would meet her and take her home. Although Jeffrey was 8 years older than her, the age gap did not bother them. Jeffrey was attentive, sweet, and caring, and quickly won Susan's heart. However, Jeffrey had some problems with alcohol and substance abuse. Jeffrey said that he had given up drugs and promised to give up drinking completely. Susan, a naive young girl, believed him. Susan felt that together they could overcome any challenge. Shortly after Susan learned she was pregnant, she immediately shared the news with Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey initially expressed joy at the prospect of becoming a father, he had not made any decisions about the future. Jeffrey did not propose, and they continued to live apart. Disturbed by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan insisted that their first child be born, and Jeffrey accepted her opinion. At the time of the marriage license, Susan was 8 months pregnant. Their wedding was a simple affair, with no guests or witnesses. A few weeks before the baby was due, they moved into a quiet house in Harris County, Texas. In December 1998, Susan gave birth to a son named Bradley. Just 3 years later, she was pregnant again. In the spring of 2002, she welcomed her second daughter, named Kay. Along the shore, the family also raised a small dog named Buck and had a spacious family car. Jeffrey worked for a local construction company, and after they had a daughter named Kay, Jeffrey agreed that Susan would stay home to care for the child. Friendly neighbors often praised Susan as a kind and caring mother. She created a cozy environment for the family. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect family. Every day, Susan has to spend a lot of time doing housework such as cleaning, organizing, cooking, and making sure everything is kept in a clean condition. Jeffrey does not want her to repeat the same recipes. The whole house has to be clean for Susan. Taking care of young children and cleaning the house at the same time can be considered impossible. Jeffrey's clothes have to be washed almost every day because he doesn't want to wear any of the same clothes again. However, following these rules manually is not easy. If Susan doesn't comply with his request, she will face insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Financially, Jeffrey is extremely frugal. Contrary to the image of a romantic man who often gives gifts and flowers, Jeffrey only gives Susan $100 a week to cover household expenses. At the same time, he also asked her to settle all expenses and provide receipts. Jeffrey also broke his earlier promise to quit drinking. However, the real problems were just beginning. Jeffrey relapsed and started using drugs again. Under the influence of these substances, Jeffrey would become aggressive and would hurt his wife and son. Whenever Susan asked Jeffrey to stop using drugs and go to rehab, Jeffrey responded with anger. Jeffrey saw no problem with his actions and believed that Susan knew about Jeffrey's drug and alcohol use before Susan married him, so she should accept it and live with it. Jeffrey's parents also knew their son's weakness and sympathized with Susan. However, they felt helpless and unable to help her. What Susan couldn't stand, however, was when her husband began to physically, emotionally, and even sexually abuse her. At first, he would apologize and promise not to do it again, but then he stopped apologizing and domestic violence became a daily occurrence. Jeffrey began boxing at the gym 3 times a week, finding that the sessions helped him relieve stress. On Monday, January 13, 2003, Jeffrey went to the gym after work as usual. When he returned home, he seemed stressed. While Susan was cooking dinner, Jeffrey decided to tell his son about the sport of boxing and teach him some basic techniques. While teaching his son boxing, Jeffrey lost control and hit the boy. The child burst into tears, and Jeffrey tried to comfort the child, hoping his wife wouldn't hear. Susan pretended not to notice, but this incident was the last straw for Susan. After dinner, Susan went to put the children to bed while Jeffrey remained in the bedroom. When Susan entered the room, Jeffrey attacked her violently. Susan thought that Jeffrey was trying to kill her with a knife. However, she reacted and realized that Jeffrey did not have a knife in his hand. Susan decided to use her dancing skills to seduce Jeffrey and lower his guard. Susan entered the room in a short silk robe and performed the dance for her husband. Susan then proposed a game, which Jeffrey agreed to participate in. In this game, Susan used 3 reins to tie Jeffrey's right hand and right leg to the bed. Jeffrey's left leg was secured with a silk strip from her robe. While Jeffrey was tied up, Susan used her panties to spank him, forming part of the intimate game. Susan gently turned off the lights. Jeffrey was now bound hand and foot, and a gag was stuffed into his mouth. The dim candles were the only remaining light. Susan then moved the bubbling hot wax onto Jeffrey's chest. Susan then continued pouring the hot wax onto his genitals, and the pain quickly became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself, tried to scream, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Susan continued to beat Jeffrey with a small, sharp knife she had taken from the kitchen. Susan started at the groin area, moving up and down, cutting Jeffrey's genitals, legs, stomach, chest, arms, neck, and face. At first, Susan moved slowly, complaining loudly with each slash, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had endured. Then Susan began to cry and stabbed faster and faster. Her actions showed that Susan was in a state of extreme despair and emotional turmoil. Susan could not stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. Susan sat by the bed next to Jeffrey's body. However, after a few hours, Susan realized that the bedroom was covered in blood and she had to clean it up before morning. Susan carefully watched the window, making sure no neighbors were watching. At this point, Susan saw a hole in the backyard, which Jeffrey had dug over the weekend to build a fountain. Susan quickly moved Jeffrey's body from the bedroom to the yard, using a garden wheelbarrow to move it. Susan decided that the pool would be Jeffrey's final resting place. After calming down, Susan spent the rest of the day, before dawn, cleaning up the evidence of the attack. Susan had to wash the blood off the floors, walls, and carpets. The carpets had large stains that could not be removed. Susan added bleach to the stains, hoping that the chemicals would erase any traces of what had happened in the room. That morning, Susan called her husband's family in Austin, Texas, sobbing. Susan told them that her husband Jeffrey, while drinking and using drugs, had attacked Susan and their young son. Jeffrey then destroyed the house, spilling a bottle of bleach on the carpet before leaving, declaring that Jeffrey did not want to continue the marriage. When Jeffrey's parents heard that Jeffrey had been beating their son, they were shocked. They knew Jeffrey wasn't perfect, and they felt sorry for Susan. They offered to let Susan and the children stay at their house for a while, but Susan refused. Instead, Susan said she would file a police report and tell them everything that had happened in the family. Then, when Jeffrey suddenly went missing, Jeffrey's mother, Mrs. Wright, went to the police station to report the incident. Susan said Jeffrey had been violent towards Susan and the children. As a result, Susan had to file for a restraining order, which meant that Jeffrey would not be allowed near Susan and the children. When Susan filed for the restraining order, Susan presented evidence of her injuries, such as bruises and cuts on her arms. Susan said the injuries were caused by Jeffrey during a fight when he hit her with a key. Susan's children were also victims, especially Bradley, who was hit by his father and had minor bruises on his face. At first glance, the story told by Susan seemed plausible. Jeffrey, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, attacked Susan and her young son, after which Jeffrey became frightened and ran away. But over time, Jeffrey stopped communicating. And Jeffrey fled without taking his belongings, papers, and even his cell phone from home. Jeffrey did not go to work or to his parents' house, and none of his friends or neighbors saw Jeffrey. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Susan's situation is not optimistic as she finds it unbearable to be in the house where Susan murdered Jeffrey and buried his body in the yard. Susan begins to feel as if Jeffrey is still alive and about to rise from the grave to take revenge. Susan is on the verge of going crazy, and their dog Buck keeps barking and trying to dig up the burial site. On January 17th, after dropping her children off at school, Susan went to her mother Velma's house. Her mother learned about the incident and asked Susan, "You killed your husband, didn't you?" Susan burst into tears and nodded. Susan confessed what had happened and revealed where Susan had hidden Jeffrey's body, saying she didn't know what to do next. On her mother's advice, Susan contacted attorney Neil Davis the next day and confessed that Susan had killed her husband. Attorney Davis worked out a solution and thought carefully about possible scenarios. On January 19th, Neil Davis called the Harris County District Attorney's office and reported that Susan Wright had killed her husband Jeffrey and buried his body in the backyard. Susan Wright was ready to give a statement to the police. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police and stated that she would give a full confession. On January 24, 2003, Susan went to the police and confessed the whole thing. However, when she was interviewed, Susan's story was unclear and full of contradictions. Susan was confused about the details and sometimes contradicted herself. Susan also claimed that Jeffrey was still alive and that she was afraid of him. As a result, Susan requested protection. As a result, Susan underwent a psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression. However, Susan was still able to understand her actions. Following Susan's statement, the police arrived at the scene and removed Jeffrey's body from the makeshift grave in the backyard. The medical examiner was surprised to see numerous injuries on the body. The medical examiner's team counted a total of 193 stab wounds on the body. Specifically, there were 8 wounds in the groin area, about 30 wounds in the legs, 23 wounds in the shoulders and arms, 22 wounds in the abdomen, 46 wounds in the arms, 23 wounds in the neck, and 41 wounds in the face. However, only 1 wound to the head could be considered the direct cause of death. All other cuts were superficial and did not pose an immediate threat to life. This left Jeffrey with a long and painful death. Police saw deep marks on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles from the ropes and belt Susan used to restrain him. These injuries indicated that Jeffrey had tried to free himself but was unsuccessful. Additionally, traces of candle wax were found on Jeffrey's gun and groin area. Susan claimed that it was an accident as her husband accidentally turned a burning candle on himself, but police believe the hot wax was more likely a form of torture inflicted on Jeffrey to cause pain. Susan's underwear was still in Jeffrey's mouth, acting as a gag to prevent Jeffrey from screaming or calling for help. Toxicology reports revealed traces of alcohol and several controlled substances in Jeffrey's system, suggesting that Jeffrey may have acted aggressively under the influence of these substances. The bedroom where the massacre took place appeared normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet, suggesting that Susan had spent a lot of time cleaning and hiding the evidence. When experts used chemicals and special equipment to detect the blood traces that had been cleaned up, a completely different view of the project emerged. Blood was found everywhere, including on the ceiling and the red blood cell cushion. The trial began in late February 2004. By that time, Susan had been in custody for a year and her children were in the care of her parents and sister Cindy. Susan's attorney had prepared extensively for the trial and worked extensively with Susan. When questioned, Susan recounted the sad story of that terrible night and the events leading up to it. Susan said she had endured years of abuse and resistance. However, when Jeffrey began abusing the children, Susan could not take it anymore. Susan recounted that fateful evening, Jeffrey came home from the gym in a state of agitation. Jeffrey then began teaching their 5-year-old son punching and fighting techniques. When the son became scared and refused, Jeffrey punched him in the face. Susan then put the child to bed and decided to talk to Jeffrey about seeking help at a clinic for alcohol and drug abuse. However, Jeffrey became angry and decided to leave, taking the keys with him. While Susan tried to stop Jeffrey, a fight broke out between the two, leaving Susan with injuries to her palm and wrist. During the attack, Jeffrey attacked her, causing her to fall to the floor and briefly lose consciousness. When Susan regained consciousness, she found Jeffrey holding a knife in his hand. Susan could not explain how the knife ended up in her hand afterward. Susan's attorney argued that Susan's mental instability was the cause of her actions, causing Susan to lose control of her attacks until she had inflicted multiple injuries on Jeffrey. Susan said she tied the rope and belt around Jeffrey's hands after inflicting multiple injuries, then used a wheelbarrow to carry Jeffrey out into the yard. As for the scraps found, Susan claimed they came from a candle that Susan had left on her bedside table that night when she had left the nightlight on. Susan could not explain why her underwear appeared in Jeffrey's mouth. The prosecution's argument and conclusion were more convincing and reasonable. Experts demonstrated that the deep wounds and abrasions on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles were inflicted while he was still alive, indicating that the binding was part of an intimate game that Susan used to lure Jeffrey into a trap. Therefore, it was reasonable that Susan's underwear had replaced the gag in Jeffrey's mouth. Furthermore, all of the wounds were inflicted at a certain angle, as if Susan were on top of Jeffrey's body, sitting on him, rather than in the midst of a struggle, which would have resulted in a different type of injury. All of the cuts were made from the front while Jeffrey was lying on his back and firmly immobilized. The question remains whether Susan planned Jeffrey's death. The prosecution claims that Susan planned the whole thing in hopes of receiving a large insurance payout. The case was widely publicized as Susan was dubbed the Blue-Eyed Butcher or the Blonde Meat Grinder by the press. Jeffrey's relatives demanded the harshest punishment for Susan. At first, people asked for a life sentence for Susan. However, in March 2004, Susan was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Susan did not think about the judge's decision and was completely emotionless. A year later, Susan's attorneys attempted to appeal the conviction, but it was denied. With new developments and a reduced sentence in 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal. This time, a new witness testimony significantly affected the outcome of the case. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McKell, had a close relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was even engaged to Jeffrey for a year. However, Misty McKell shared horrific experiences of being physically and mentally abused by Jeffrey, causing her to abandon plans for marriage and end the relationship permanently. After considering Misty McKell's testimony, Susan's sentence was reduced to 20 years. In 2014, when she was 38 years old, Susan was eligible for parole once but was denied. Susan was also denied a second time in July 2017. Finally, after 16 years in prison, Susan was released in the winter of 2020, when she was 44 years old. Susan Wright's case was widely covered in the media and aired on the U.S. national television network Court TV. The story was later made into several popular television documentaries, including 48 Hours Mystery and The Secret Lives of Stepford Wives. In 2012, the feature film Blue-Eyed Butcher was released, starring actress Sarah Paxton as Susan Wright. Additionally, in 2014, Canadian documentary filmmaker Chloe Ballant discovered a short film inspired by Susan Wright's trial. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of John Parker. John Parker was born in 1970 in Indiana, United States, to a middle-class family and have a brother. From a young age, John had a strong ambition to succeed. He valued being independent and continually sought ways to better himself, as well as looking for opportunities for growth and advancement. After graduating from high school, John began searching for ways to earn money. According to his brother, John's first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant. However, he quit his job soon after, but the exact reason for his departure is unclear. Undeterred, John quickly found a new job that offered more freedom, allowing him to explore and develop his passion for pursuing a career in sales. John started working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family teased him, but he soon demonstrated his capabilities to everyone, and he also found his purpose in life. By the end of his first year, John had become one of the company's top salesmen, and he was eager to continue achieving more. John worked extremely long hours, typically between 12 to 16 hours a day. As a result, he became a top sales performer, earning recognition at company meetings. John's success also made him a source of inspiration and guidance for his fellow salespeople. During this time, he met Judy, a 20-year-old woman from a low-income family in Texas. Judy was born in October 1969. She was confident, extremely, and outgoing. Although John wasn't planning to hire any additional salespeople at the time, but she was able to convince John that she had what it took to achieve great success in sales. Judy's past was marked by significant life events. With her parents' consent, she had gotten married at the age of 14 and had 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, but it ultimately ended in divorce. When she met John, she was determined to start a new chapter in her life. John decided to give Judy a chance, taking her under his wing as a mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Not only did Judy prove herself as a valuable member of the sales team, but she also won John's heart. As time passed, they began to date. John's life was thriving, both personally and professionally. He has built a solid reputation for his sales and training abilities, and most importantly, he has the love and support of his wife Judy. John expanded on his experience by starting his own business in Michigan, specializing in selling and servicing Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, sharing his personal secrets and enthusiasm that had made him successful in the industry. John's company quickly rose to the top in the area, and he credited his success to Judy's support. After establishing his career, John and Judy got married in 1992. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica. As John's business continued to thrive, they relocated to better homes, providing their children with access to excellent schools, luxury cars, and regular vacations. Initially, John had a very good relationship with Judy's stepchildren, Christina and Daniel. Christina was a sweet girl, while Daniel was more energetic and mischievous. The family enjoyed a comfortable life, thanks to John's growing wealth. He openly showcased his success to motivate the young salespeople he trained, demonstrating the potential rewards of hard work and determination. However, as Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems arose. Christina associated with a group of friends who had unhealthy habits, and as a result she started drinking with them. According to some reports, Christina has also used drugs. Meanwhile, Daniel, 13, often appears angry and doesn't seem to fit in with his friends. On one occasion, Daniel took John's car and recklessly drove around the neighborhood with friends, damaging several mailbox posts. The next day, John visited each affected house, compensating the homeowners for the damage, to prevent them from filing a police report about the boys' actions. Around this time, John was also summoned to Daniel's school that the boy had misbehaved and they needed to discuss the issue. John and Judy's relationship became strained after he got into a physical altercation with Daniel. After 9 years together, Judy took her family to Texas to visit her childhood home and meet her brother. During the trip, Judy confided in her brother about her troubled marriage and John's mistreatment of her children. However, the situation was more complex. Judy's older children were misbehaving, and she took their side, which added to the tension. Things escalated when John suspected Judy of having an affair with one of his employees. John installed cameras in the office to gather evidence. When he obtained proof of Judy's infidelity, his life was turned upside down, and his demeanor changed drastically. He began to drink heavily, which led to intense arguments with Judy and rough treatment of their children. One incident involved his daughter Tiffany, who was beaten with a belt for not bringing her homework to school. When her teacher noticed the marks the next day, she reported it to social services. Before they arrived, John warned the 4 kids that if they wanted to maintain their luxurious lifestyle, they should say nothing about the beating. Consequently, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel. John's bad mood not only affected his family but also his employees and clients, who suffered from his outbursts of rage. To keep Judy away from her lover, John moved the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite his hopes for a fresh start, things did not improve. Judy started to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, while John let himself go, growing his beard, smoking, and wearing only jeans. He became increasingly distracted. The business struggled due to John's condition, nearly going bankrupt and forcing him to sell his boat to stay afloat. Office rumors swirled about Judy's alleged affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man, fueling more arguments. At one point, Judy told John she wanted a divorce, but it wouldn't be straightforward. John felt he had given Judy everything, rescuing her from poverty, accepting her children, and showering her with luxuries. When love turns to resentment, he began cutting off Judy's financial sources. John made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and he had a secret recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the situation at the start of 2003. The tension between John and Judy affected the children, whose behavior worsened. Even Tiffany was grounded during the holidays for starting a fire on school grounds with a friend. The arguments finally ended on Thursday, April 17, 2013, when John and Judy went out to dinner. They were likely looking for a way to resolve issues and reduce the tension between them. After dinner, the couple called home to check on their kids and told them they would be back soon. Then, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. As John and Judy left the restaurant, John decided to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late at the office. John and Judy arrived at the office, located in a deserted industrial area. Just before 10 p.m. John went inside to talk to Jeff, while Judy picked up Christina's notebook and returned to the car. A few minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side of the car to look for something. Suddenly, two loud bangs were heard, and John collapsed on the ground. Judy and Jeff immediately called 911. Police and medical units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was pronounced dead at the scene. When questioned by the police, Judy, who was inside the car when the incident happened, was unable to provide much information. Judy said she was sitting in the car when John came out of the office and opened the back door on the driver's side. Immediately, she heard two loud shots. Judy's reaction was to hide behind the seat. When she finally lifted her head, she caught a glimpse of a man in dark clothing running away from the car. Initially, it seemed like a robbery because John's wallet was missing. However, as investigators examined the scene more closely, they began to have doubts. John and Judy hadn't told anyone they would be there, which raised several questions. What were the chances of a random robbery in a deserted industrial are very rare. If the motive had been robbery, it's puzzling that the perpetrator would first kill John and then take his wallet. This is especially confusing since John was visibly wearing a valuable gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry. Typically, thieves would thoroughly search the victim's pockets in such situations. The fact that this didn't happen raises more questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene, which supports Judy's account of hearing 2 shots. One shot killed John instantly, but there's no official information about the second shot. With many unanswered questions, investigators started work taking a statement from Judy. Judy reported that her husband had argued with an employee from his company prior to the incident and identified the individual. However, she couldn't provide any additional information beyond her initial statement at the scene. Jeff, who was inside the office, also couldn't offer any useful insights, as when he heard the gunshots and went outside, it was all over. Meanwhile, authorities informed Christina, a Parker resident, that her stepfather had passed away. With robbery ruled out as a motive, detectives turned their attention to John's circle of relatives and colleagues. They began with an employee who had allegedly argued with John, but the employee claimed they had resolved their issues amicably and had a verified alibi. The investigation expanded, include John's business partners, employees, competitors, friends, and family. Judy's behavior during the funeral surprised and puzzled many people, as she seemed cheerful and socialized with friends, which was unexpected given the circumstances. Her ex-husband was also seen casually reading a newspaper at the funeral. For days after the murder, police brought in 15-year-old Daniel for questioning because he was accused of hiring gang members to kill his stepfather, John. When questioned, Daniel admitted to paying someone to hurt John, but claimed he only wanted him injured, not killed. The police arrested one of the young men that Daniel had hired, but they were released after their alibi checked out. Daniel was also released after 9 days due to lack of evidence and his status as a minor. Later, it was discovered that John had problems with Judy's children, which led to further investigation into Daniel and raised suspicions about Judy's 17-year-old daughter, Christina. When questioned, Christina denied any involvement, and this lead also went nowhere. However, investigators were left wondering who was providing the money for these schemes, and they suspected Judy was the source. Further investigation showed that Judy and John's relationship had gotten much worse before he died, and Judy's affair was discovered. However, sources revealed that John had no plans to leave his wife and was trying to save their relationship. Judy's main reason for targeting her husband seemed to be financial gain, as detectives found that John had 2 life insurance policies worth $1 million. After John's death, Judy tried to claim this money, but the insurance company initially refused to pay due to the ongoing investigation. Receiving the insurance money becomes even more complicated when John's father suspects Judy of being involved in his son's death. Despite these leads, the case stalled due to lack of concrete evidence. Over time, the John family household underwent substantial transformations. Judy was rarely at home, as she was busy with her new partner, Jeff, who was John's trusted manager. In Judy's absence, Christina and Daniel took care of Tiffany and Erica. Later, Judy and Jeff moved out of state with Tiffany and Erica, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina, who was pregnant and had a boyfriend, stayed in the house. Although the investigation had stalled, authorities kept the case open, regularly reviewing the files in hopes of finding new leads. Their persistence paid off when they came to question some of Christina and Daniel's classmates. These schoolmates admitted to selling a firearm to Christina and Daniel. This information prompted detectives to investigate a piece of land owned by the family that Christina used for target practice. Upon inspection, several bullet casings were found. Laboratory analysis revealed a crucial clue: the bullet casings matched those from the crime scene where John was killed. In 2007, a colleague who was a narcotics officer provided additional information. The narcotics officer had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, who was involved in a drug case and was arrested, to request a lighter sentence. Christina's former boyfriend revealed a conversation he had with Judy. In this conversation, Judy mentioned that her son Daniel was the one who fired the fatal shot that killed John. When confronted with this new information, 21 years old, Christina, who was linked to the weapon used in the crime, began to cooperate. She admitted to buying the weapon and calling John and Judy on the night of the incident. She had asked them to stop by the office, claiming she needed to pick up forgotten homework. Christina confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When Daniel was 19, he was found and arrested in Arizona. Daniel was shown new evidence about the shooting and Christina's statement. He admitted to shooting John, but said his mother, Judy, was the one who planned the whole thing. Daniel said Judy had forged checks from her company to get the $7,500 to hire someone to kill John. However, when the people she hired took the money without doing the job, Judy told them to buy a gun for Daniel to use instead. Daniel also said it was Judy's idea to make up a reason for leaving the house that night by calling about homework. He said he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accident that happened while he was looking through John's pockets for his wallet, as his mother had told him to do. Daniel was also told to come back home without telling his younger sisters what had happened. His sister Christina helped by keeping the girls busy watching TV. Daniel said Judy convinced them to commit the crime by telling them they were being abused by John. And Judy promises them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also discovered that Judy had previously attempted to kill her husband. She had tried to poison his food, which resulted in John being briefly hospitalized with what was thought to be food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to conspiracy and was released on bail. In March 2008, Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to kill his stepfather, John. As part of a deal, Daniel agreed to admit his guilt and testify against his mother. The prosecution agreed not to charge him with murder, but he still faced a prison sentence of 20 to 25 years. Daniel claimed that when he was 14, about a year before the incident, his mother and sister asked him to help kill John. His mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do, including showering after the crime to remove gunpowder residue. Judy took responsibility for disposing of the evidence, including the gun, clothes, and her husband's wallet. In July 2009, 6 years after John's death, Judy turned herself in and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. She admitted to planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution asked for a sentence of 28 to 35 years in prison. Judy, almost 40, was sentenced to 33 years in late August 2009. Daniel was sentenced to 23 years in September, and Christina received a 5-year sentence in October. Press reports state that Daniel was released from custody in 2017. He then chose to keep a low profile. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but she tragically died from a drug overdose. This case was driven by greed. Although Judy was successful, her greater desires led her to terrible crimes. Judy's actions not only destroyed a successful business owner but also had a profound impact on her 4 children. 2 of them ended up in prison, and the younger ones were left without their parents once again.